definitely longer than normal crank time. Let's clear these. See if this code comes right back. Whoa, definite long crank time. Immediate crank sensor fault. It's running off the cam sensor. Tach's not working either. So a little preliminary stuff you guys just watched about what we're chasing on this truck. Today I took it for a test drive. I did a visual on all of the components first for the crank sensor. And one of the things that I found is this harness right here laying on the power steering line. It's hard to tell, like you see me moving it away, but there is a divot in that conduit. I'm not sure that it's all the way through into a wire, but that's the kind of thing you're looking for when you're looking for contact points. I did the same thing underneath the truck. I moved some wires, you know, just kind of shook some things, which might have been a bad idea. Then I hooked in, as you can see here, with this electrical probe. This is Phil's electrical probe, by the way. Love this probe. And actually you can see some liquid tape here on this wire that I forgot that I had done this. I would have used this truck in class at school hundreds of times, and over the years I would have shown crank sensor signals. You see this liquid tape that's still on this wire. That's how you fix it. There's no issues with this wire whatsoever. And I probed that wire probably easily 10 years ago. Easily 10 years ago. And it's still holding up. So just a word on that. But I'm hooked into that crank sensor wire, and then I took the truck for a ride. You can see the signals here. Little bit of noise in the waveform in that we have some body grounds. I'm using a brake line for my ground, and what you'll see is there's a lot of hash in this signal. I was trying to get the signal to drop out, but you see all the hash that's in this signal. This is just because I'm using a body ground, and I proved it to you guys too. I pulled into a parking lot. I turned the engine off, and you'll see this flat line, very nice looking 5-volt signal. And then I just turned the key on, and you see this same waviness in that 5-volt signal line just from turning the key on. That's because I'm using that body ground. So ignore the hash. I did try to get this to act up on my test drive, looking at the crank sensor signal, driving it. You see the signal frequency increasing, decreasing. At times watching the signal, you see this air gap in the signal. That's normal. These are sync notches in the crank sensor signal. And I was trying to save time for us today by doing this and trying to get it to act up, and I could not. Initially though, you saw that my tach was dropping out, crank sensor fault, and then I had 2 downstream oxygen sensor codes. One was lean and rich, the other was rich, and those were downstream, both of them. And then we have a tank level sensor code. We already talked about all of those. I'm trying to connect the dots with all of this, and I'm really just gonna focus back on my crank sensor wiring again, where we're starting now. And then while I'm under there, I want to eyeball the wiring for the downstream sensors. I'm not going to worry about the fuel tank level issue, totally separate. That's involved with the tank. These GMs, the fingers break off on the float, like as the fingers ride on the wiper, they actually break off, the wipers wear out. This has 130,000 miles, and it only does it when I fill my tank all the way. So I know for a fact it's internal. Separate issue. Again, separate issue. This is not a one diagnostic fee for all of these different problems that you're going to attack. Wiring inspection, and then we'll start it up. Actually, I'll start it up, run it. We'll look at the waveform while I'm doing wiring inspections, and I'll push on that harness next to that power steering line and see if we can make that signal drop out too. We'll start with that. Starting it. So yeah, I mean, my truck, guys, you know, it's typical mechanic truck. It's been neglected. Take a real quick look here. You see where I'm pointing. My exhaust manifold bolt is missing. It's broken off, and it ticks when it's cold. So the manifold gasket leaks too, and that can set oxygen sensor fault codes as well. And I have some other exhaust leaks too. I need to fix that. I need to stop neglecting my truck. But anyway, I'm gonna start with, while I'm watching this signal, let me increase my time base for this test. All right, so I'm gonna start doing some wiggle testing. I'm gonna push on this area where that harness was rubbing through to start with. Nothing doing there. Now I'll get a better look. Here's a shot, Caleb. The harness, see where it's rubbed through? So I definitely need to open that up now and look at the wires right there and make sure. And this is what happens when you disturb things, is, you know, I couldn't get it to do it on that test drive, and I very well may have fixed it by moving that away. Let's just see. Let's see what we got. It's pretty deteriorated, of course, because it's old and it's hot. I know my hand's in the way. I'll get out of the way in a second. Can't tell. It does not look like it. The worst part's like I really disturbed it now. I'm gonna say no, but man, it's just so hard. It's in a location I just couldn't see really well. I think that's my crank sensor wire there, that white one. It's white and black. Yeah, that's it. That's my crank sensor wire. I'm just looking to see if that one was touching it all. But it also could have been the reference wire for the crank, which I don't have that color. But I don't think that was touching. We've seen them. It's real hard to see sometimes. I'll wrap that back up later. It's real hard to see sometimes when you got a wire touching like that. I mean, the only reason I'm really focused on that is like, I took it for a ride and I couldn't get it to do it, and that was after disturbing the harness. Caleb, I'm just gonna have you, I'll go under with my phone and I'll use my phone camera. I'll just have you really focused on, actually your best bet would be the tachometer, and then I will extend this down below for me. You'll see the tach drop to 0. I'll see the signal drop out as I'm doing some wiggle tests down underneath. Let's look at some downstream oxygen sensor stuff while we're here. All right, there's my downstream harness. That's my one downstream sensor. It runs across the frame. The only reason I was eyeballing that is just to see if there's any relation to the crank sensor wiring. Not seeing that. It runs up. So the crank sensor wire is here. You got to pull the starter out on these. Change the sensor. And it runs up by the oil pan up in the front. So right up in here where I'm pointing up there. We'll do a real good visual, we'll move some things. Watch the scope too. See any damage. The area right there I don't like. It goes to another sensor. Okay. Yeah, I'm not really seeing anything. Let's do a tap test on this sensor. Maybe we can get it to act up. Come on, man. Man, I cannot get this to act up. It really makes me worried about the harness. See the other downstream sensor that runs that way. Where's it go from there? Up around. Unrelated, completely. But I'm gonna look closer at this harness, Caleb, because I'm worried about, there might have been a wire touching right there. I need to do a better visual here. Oh, there is a wire that's damaged right there. This one gray wire, I'll have to get a diagram to see. Right there on that corner. That's on a twisted pair though. That's not gonna be my crank sensor. I don't think so. A lot of crank sensor signals would be on a twisted pair, but this is my crank wire right here. These are can wires right here. That's the problem with moving a harness, is like you're not sure where that was. It was touching this one can wire. Surprised I didn't have any CAN issues. That wire right there, that was starting to rub through, but not the crank sensor wire. It would help to know my other colors for my crank sensor that are in this harness. You know, now that we moved everything out of the way, chances of it doing it are slim to none if it was here. You see this is my main engine computer harness right here, right? And then it runs up to here. And I just gently was tugging on some of this earlier, and I literally have not gotten it to act up since. And it was literally every time I was driving it. Okay, I'll leave that harness open. Let's put this back together and let's go drive it. See if we can make it do it. I mean, typically you have a sensor that's failing, you can do a tap test on it, especially hot, and it'll act up on you. And I couldn't do it. It was not reacting to what I was doing. And I got to tell you, like, I don't want to drop the starter on this and put a crank sensor in it if that's not going to fix it. All right, we're going to take this for a ride. Caleb, this thing is not acting up. This is the longest that it has been driven, I believe. Now, Bo's been driving it every day. In fact, I'm going to call him real quick. This makes me really, really nervous to walk the path of throwing a sensor in it. Every day that you've been driving this truck, the tach's been dropping out on you, correct?
So the other day, it wasn't. Like, when I woke up and started driving it, it was fine. But then on the way back, it, like, stuttered, and then the tach dropped down all the way to 0.
But, I mean, pretty much, though...
Most of the time, it's been at 0.
Yeah, like, the whole, like... I mean, I noticed it last week, but it's pretty much been every time you get in it and drive it, it's been acting up, correct?
Yeah.
Was there a day at all that it didn't act up?
Yeah, like on the way to school one time, it didn't act up.
But that's only 2 miles, so we've driven further than that. Okay.
On my work, I didn't feel that, like, stutter, but the tach was at 0 when I first started the car, though. So. On
the first start of the day, it was at 0?
Yeah.
And that was when?
Tuesday.
So after school, or is in the morning?
After school.
Interesting. So initially, first starting it up, it was sitting at 0.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure because I didn't feel any stutter in it though. When I was driving.
Well, you won't. It'll only stutter when it first happens. But the fact that the tach was sitting on 0 means that fault was occurring right from startup. Okay. Okay.
I wouldn't like guarantee that it was at 0.
Yeah.
I'm like 80% sure.
Yeah.
But I would say, like, when I was at school, like, when I was driving to school, I felt it. And then it went to 0.
Yeah. Okay.
But that was the same day. So
Perfect.
I don't know if that has anything to play with it.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That helps me. Thanks, Bo.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
All right, bye.
See ya.
I'll tell you what, man. I think putting a sensor in this is not the right move. I think I'm going to hold on to the sensor. I mean, I know this for sure. I'm not putting this sensor in right now. I think taping up that harness where I did see some damage on that one CAN network wire, now that's not going to set a crank sensor fault. That's going to give you all kind of different symptoms. A CAN network wire that is touching ground is going to cause all kinds of U codes. That's communication codes. We did not have those. However, it's very possible, I'm just not seeing because I can't get my face close enough to that harness to see just a tiny little nick in that crank sensor wire right there. It is absolutely possible that's what was happening. It's very unusual for when you start having sensor failures to have one that is doing it initially on startup like Bo just described to me. Like, it was immediate on startup. That engine was cold. So here's what I'm thinking, guys. Final thought. I'm just gonna tape up that harness where I saw that damage, and I'm gonna let my son take this to work tonight. Let him report back to me what happens with it, and we'll attack the downstream O2 codes and the fuel tank level issue on a different video. Different problems, different faults. We'll do those later. All right. I just shut it off, restarted it, no problem, got gas. I did not fill it all the way because we're having float issues, but we'll cover that in another video. The mistake that I made on this truck was I moved that harness out of the way. I was doing contact point visuals, and I have messed with my power steering line, so that line probably sits in a little bit different spot than what it should have. And the mistake I made, and the mistake you guys can make when you're tracking individual intermittent problems, is you move things out of the way, move a harness. Don't do that. Eyeball all your contact points, and then your next step would be grab the signal like I am right now, look at the signal, and then push in on the harness, gently push in and wiggle on that harness. That's how you reveal those types of really, really small wiring harness issues. There could be one little tiny copper strand on that white wire that I cannot see from that distance away. I need to be closer up and I can't get there. And that's how you reveal those kind of issues. That's what I think it was happening here. So I kind of love it from a case in point here of you cannot change parts based on a code. That's exactly what we're dealing with this crank sensor fault. And I might eat those words, and this may end up being a sensor down the road, but that's where we're wrapping this one up. I'll try to take a better picture of that down there with my phone. I'll clean that up really good with some brake clean and wipe it off and see if I can see a rub mark on that white wire. If I can, I'll include it. If I can't, just not. But I'm gonna tape that harness up using some Tessa tape, real good stuff. I'll put a newer piece of conduit on it and a zip tie to pull it away from that line, and then I'll let my son take it to work tonight and let him drive it. It's been acting up every single day he's been driving it, so we'll have a better idea tonight and tomorrow on the fix. So that's the plan. That's what we're doing. Caleb and I are gonna grab something to eat, and then yeah, I'll just get you a final shot when we get back home of the harness. I'll clean it up. I'll take a picture, let you guys see it, and then we'll wrap it up. First things first, some liquid tape. As you can see, the last time I did this, it lasted for 10 years. So we're gonna worry about piercing a wire? No, get over yourself. That's my reply to you non-piercers out there. Can we call them purists? Done. Can definitely see that part, that it's a gray, well, it's kind of gray wire where it is got some damage there. So absolutely that was rubbing through, and there's a good chance that this one of the crank sensor wires was the same, and I don't know, it could be the reference wire too. I see no damage on this white wire at all, like none. It's like such a huge stretch to say that was the problem. I know that can wire is not going to cause that. It is absolutely not. I'm just not seeing it. And normally you can feel them too. What do you think, guys? I think it's coming back. If I were to be a betting man, I would not be betting on this being a fix. However, I am done. We're just going to tape this up for now. I'm going to let my son take this to work with him, drive it for a few days, and we'll go from there. For that exposed can wire, let's put a little bit of tape on that, liquid tape on that too. Will the can wire that was rubbing cause oxygen sensor codes? No. Will the can wire that was rubbing cause a crank sensor code? No. Will the can wire that was rubbing cause U codes and communication codes? Yes. Just trying to answer some questions you guys are probably having right now, that's all. Is it possible that I missed something in there that I couldn't see that was related to the crank sensor? Yes. If the 5-volt ref wire for the crank sensor was shorted, we should have reference circuit codes. So I don't think that was an issue. If it was the sensor ground wire that was rubbing for the crank sensor, it would do nothing. would make no difference at all. So it would have to be on the crank sensor wire itself, and I could not see damage on that crank sensor wire. That is why I believe that this problem is going to come back, and it is not fixed. But we shall see. Well, this is my unhappy face. Yeah, tack dropped out. Check engine light came back on my son last night. So I'm going to be a parts changer. I'm going to change this crank sensor, and we're going to cross our fingers. Sometimes you got to roll the dice. Sometimes you got to be a parts changer. That's what we're doing on this one. So I'll update you guys here in a couple of days next to see how it goes. I'll give you, a couple of quick shots of me changing this sensor too. Hate being a parts changer. I always like to prove it. Sometimes proving it's not an option. I can't really show you very well because I got one hand, but yeah, these two sensors look the same distance, same length and everything like that. So putting it back in, pretty easy install. New sensor installed. For you do-it-yourselfers out there that are watching, you do not have to unbolt the wiring for the starter. Just make sure you disconnect the battery. Lay your starter over to the side like I did. The reason you disconnect your battery is those wires are live. We don't want to bump them on anything and have an arc. Right, so battery disconnected, move your starter out of the way, change the sensor. Again, communication with your customer is key in this scenario. Okay, and don't get rid of the factory sensor yet, right? Still an unknown here. We want to make sure that this aftermarket one's compatible, so I'm going to go test drive it right now. We'll know right away. These, the ones I've seen on the 6 liters, it's a high RPM misfire from aftermarket crank sensor, and we've seen that too on Jeeps as well, as of recently. But let's go test drive it, see how it does. Save the sensor, don't throw it away. Oh, something else in case I forget to mention it, there is no air gap adjustments on this. There is the area right here where my thumb is. There's rust that can build up there, and it can technically push this out a little bit. Mine looked okay, just be aware of that. But no air gap adjustment with this particular crank sensor. While we're waiting for that, let's just give this its first start. Yep, so far so good. Just gonna pull up some data parameters for us too. I didn't do that before. Just going to go to my ECM directly. Read codes, there shouldn't be any. Had the battery disconnected. I'm interested in probably, we'll pick the cam position actuator data because that should have cam and crank. I think that works. Let's go for a ride. Let's see what this looks like. We can combine some of these graphs too if we want to. I know we didn't look at any cam or crank data parameters before, but I figured you guys would want to see them, and it gives you guys a visual to look at other than just my tachometer that I'm looking at here. Tachometer being the biggest one. Does the tack drop out? I had mentioned before that I didn't think it was a sensor given that it was an initial cold start one that my son had, and that assumption was wrong. I am wrong often in my assumptions. One of the things about troubleshooting that we all need to do is we will have an assumption on something, and we need to prove that, like a hypothesis, like this is a possible scenario, and then we set out to prove or disprove that. And in this case, if this was a faulty sensor, it just acted very strangely. Like I tapped on it, couldn't make it act up. It was more than just a hot engine issue. I'd mentioned early on that it cooled down, then it was fine. Well, it also did it when it was cold only. So very strange. Very possible that this ends up not being a sensor. All right, let's do a little quick wide open throttle snap or run here. Just want to see how she does. It is not downshifting. Thank you. I'm not sure why it didn't downshift there at first. I did have the battery disconnected. There are certain learning procedures. Transmission shift points would be one of them. Throttle body, idle learn compensation, all of that wiped out with the battery disconnect. That was very strange. It did not downshift. There we go. Okay, that felt pretty good. No crank sensor issues yet. That's good. That's a win. But I thought we won yesterday. I had a pretty extensive test drive and I didn't have any issues. This is going to be a couple of days. I'll have to update you guys. Well, so far so good on this. I'm going to shut this down, I think. We got many other things we can attack on this truck whenever I have more time. We will do that. And I'll update you guys in a couple of days of driving this. It's just going to be me coming back on the camera and saying, hey, I've had no issues since changing the crank sensor, or the next thing you're gonna see is me chasing this crank sensor code again outside of the sensor and outside of the harness that I've checked so far. I hope that's not the case. I really do hope the crank sensor fixed it for my personal reasons and for the parts changers out there. You know, like I said, I kind of hope it doesn't. All right, guys, talk to you soon. Okay, everyone, this is day 2 with the new crank sensor. Multiple starts, multiple drives, no issues so far. So we'll just kind of keep you guys focused here for a minute. Just took the dogs for a walk, all 3 of them. Ducky took me for a walk. Or my shoulder anyway. Hey, Ducky, what are you doing? Little meathead. Yeah, I don't see any issues here, people. Faulty crank sensor. So, yeah, sometimes you can change a part based on a code. Countering what I've been talking about. But again, sometimes when you can't prove a fault and it's an easy sensor to get to, you're better off doing that. You know, if it took me 5 hours to get to that sensor to change that part, I think you want to definitely verify it. One in particular I'm thinking of was my RV with the crank sensors on that. It was like a 10-hour job to get to the crank sensors on the RV, and I had to know for sure before I made that call. I was doing some scope testing on the RV crank sensor signal right at the ECM before I changed that part. I was able to duplicate that fault, and I would spend more time on this one. I would have spent more time in testing to verify that that was indeed a sensor fault if it was very difficult to get to. So you kind of weigh that in with the repair, is how difficult is it to get to that component and how much is that component. All is a factor. So I hope you guys like this one. Appreciate you being here with me.